Why is it that the government and private entities like Lockheed Martin hold all the keys to high-fidelity UFO evidence? And by all the keys, I literally mean every single piece of smoking gun proof. The answer is as shocking as it is unavoidable, because the phenomenon wants it this way. If the very first crashed saucer had happened just last week, and the evidence remained exclusively in private hands, we could dismiss that, or this, as merely circumstantial. But considering numerous crashes have reportedly occurred since at least the 1930s, and every single piece of definitive proof has consistently been controlled by governments and private corporations, the idea of mere coincidence collapses under its own weight. It defies all logic that a non-human intelligence could engage with our world so frequently and blatantly over decades, yet somehow leave no undeniable public trace. Could something this improbable truly be accidental or miraculous? Probably not. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke. The phenomenon likely possesses capabilities so advanced that meticulously orchestrating who obtains definitive evidence and ensuring that it remains strictly contained within militaries, intelligence agencies, and aerospace corporations is entirely within its grasp. We don't fully understand how they have accomplished this. But given we've only had access to sophisticated artificial intelligence for a few short years, we're hardly qualified to judge what's possible, let alone probable. Don't let any scientist or physicist convince you otherwise. No matter how intelligent they believe themselves to be, humanity remains profoundly primitive compared to the non-human intelligences engaging our world. Engineered crashes, engineered secrecy. We can, however, hypothesize how the phenomenon might have engineered a scenario allowing it to regularly abduct people, enter and exit our oceans, traverse our skies, and even occasionally land at schools in broad daylight, yet consistently evade any definitive documentation entering the public domain. The cover-up appears to have begun with so-called crashes and intentional landings, events confirmed by insiders like David Grush, Dr. Eric Davis, and Jake Barber. I'm thoroughly unconvinced that any of these crashes were genuinely accidental. But even if some did result from malfunctions, pilot error, or military intervention, the fundamental outcome remains unchanged. The elephant in the room is that despite decades of crashes and intentional landings, not one mishap has led to worldwide scientific recognition of their presence. Without exception, every crashed or landed UAP has ended up securely in the hands of governments and private aerospace companies, never the public. Should we truly believe this is the result of mere coincidence? Why not a crash in the middle of Times Square? Why not a landing in a suburban neighborhood with hundreds of people filming? Why do these incidents always seem to take place in remote deserts, military zones, or places where only insiders have access to the wreckage? The answer is both simple and obvious. This is precisely the outcome the phenomenon intended. From a purely probabilistic standpoint, it's exceedingly difficult to formulate a persuasive counter-argument. If UFOs were merely advanced vehicles occasionally prone to malfunctions or accidental crashes, we would expect incidents to occur randomly, some inevitably happening in places where maintaining secrecy would be impossible. But that has never happened. Every major retrieval event takes place under circumstances ensuring immediate government control. The uncomfortable truth is that the phenomenon itself is directing the narrative. As unsettling as this realization may be, the unfolding story isn't organic, it's orchestrated. If these were genuine accidents, at least one significant crash would have already shattered this secrecy wide open. How many alien craft does the US government have? We don't know precisely how many non-human craft the US government and its aerospace contractors possess. Journalist Michael Schellenberger's sources report that the government holds at least 12 alien spacecraft, possibly more. Jake Barber recently mentioned to Jesse Michaels that although he didn't know exactly what became of the egg-shaped UAP his team retrieved, he confirmed it was taken to a secure facility. He added that it was likely either destroyed, hidden, or buried, because they now have so many of these vehicles that new recoveries no longer spark much interest. Or alternatively, it may have been researched under conditions of utmost secrecy. Let that sink in. Aerospace companies have reportedly recovered enough non-human craft that additional finds are met with little more than indifference, even as 8 billion of us remain entirely without epistemological proof that non-human intelligence is engaging our world. Perhaps I'm overstating things, but the staggering disparity between those casually stockpiling alien craft and a world still deprived of answers to one of humanity's most profound questions strikes me as absurd. Unless, of course, it's exactly the outcome the phenomenon intended. It gets even more absurd when considering global circumstances. Various credible sources have revealed or implied a sub-Rosa Cold War, where multiple countries, including China and Russia, compete with the United States to be the first to successfully back-engineer alien craft. Even more remarkably, these nations might possess potentially as many craft as the United States. A global Cold War over alien technology. The fact that multiple countries are independently experiencing both crashes and intentional landings, yet secrecy remains perfectly intact across all of them, amplifies the absurdity of attributing this to coincidence. With each additional crash or landing event, the probability of maintaining universal secrecy through sheer luck or human efficiency becomes exponentially less plausible. Given these facts, can you genuinely question whether we're being manipulated by the phenomenon? How often have craft intentionally landed in China and Russia to advance their research programs? Why doesn't the phenomena open this up for humanity at large? The strategic distribution of these landings, consistently enabling powerful nations to maintain secrecy, strongly suggests that the phenomenon is intentionally facilitating this controlled environment. The ontological stalemate. Our civilization is stuck in an ontological stalemate, a deliberately engineered scenario saturated by credible testimonies, anomalous events, documented military incidents, tepid governmental admissions, and suspiciously evasive official behavior. This saturation has led many to strongly suspect or even firmly believe that non-human intelligence is actively engaging with our world. Yet, we remain deprived of definitive smoking gun evidence, meticulously concealed by governments, militaries, and aerospace corporations. This engineered scenario generates profound existential tension. It allows society to selectively choose its own version of reality, either believing we're not alone based on overwhelming anecdotal and indirect evidence, or comfortably dismissing it all as hoaxes, lies, or misidentifications due to the lack of public verifiable proof. This stalemate isn't accidental, it's strategic. Humanity remains deliberately locked within it by the phenomenon's actions. Before exploring why the phenomenon might orchestrate such a scenario, it's essential to address a few potential rebuttals. Some argue that these craft always land in secluded places or test ranges, areas where governments or aerospace contractors can quickly recover them, simply because microwave weapons intentionally bring them down in these locations. This rebuttal fails on multiple levels. First, microwave weapons may disable a craft, but cannot necessarily guarantee precisely where it will crash. Just one slight miscalculation could shatter decades of secrecy. Second, and more importantly, this argument doesn't explain why every intentional landing consistently ends up under government control. Jake Barber, reflecting on his experience with legacy UFO crash retrieval programs, suggested that even when craft are forcibly brought down using microwave technology, their occupants or controllers appear to remain cooperative participants. In other words, the use of microwaves to disable craft does not fundamentally change the situation. These vehicles still seem intentionally delivered into the hands of aerospace companies. Barber's observations strongly imply that even supposed forced retrievals align with the phenomenon's underlying intent. Moreover, non-human craft have no inherent reason to fly over military ranges, making themselves vulnerable to microwave attacks, much less intentionally land in these locations. The recurring pattern of such incidents strongly suggests deliberate choice rather than coincidence or accident. Moreover, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper recently revealed that a previously unknown secretive U.S. Air Force program tracked UFOs, particularly over Area 51. Consider the implications. Why would the phenomenon consistently and deliberately expose itself near one of the most sensitive military installations in the world, a facility synonymous with government secrecy, unless maintaining secrecy was precisely its intention? Even if we assume the phenomenon merely aimed to observe advanced military technology, it still knowingly chose a location guaranteeing that any gathered evidence would remain securely hidden from public scrutiny. Regardless of motive, the outcome remains the same: sustained secrecy in an ongoing ontological stalemate meticulously orchestrated by the phenomenon itself. Another common argument that aerospace corporations and the military possess smoking gun evidence simply because of their superior technology and sensors is equally unconvincing and deeply flawed. The phenomenon doesn't evade public detection simply because our civilian technology isn't advanced enough. It intentionally positions itself to ensure smoking gun evidence always lands securely within entities capable of and committed to maintaining secrecy. This level of control is so mind-boggling that even someone as influential as Elon Musk, who holds top-level security clearances and leads one of the world's most advanced aerospace companies, remains completely out of the loop, as confirmed in his recent interview on the Joe Rogan Experience. If evidence of non-human technology were naturally distributed, influential figures like Musk, who are positioned at the cutting edge of space exploration, would inevitably gain some exposure to it. Instead, he confidently asserts that no exotic propulsion systems exist, reinforcing that access to definitive proof isn't just restricted, it's deliberately curated and strategically withheld. Beyond bureaucracy, active manipulation by the phenomenon. This isn't merely a passive consequence of human bureaucracy or compartmentalization. The secrecy surrounding non-human technology appears meticulously orchestrated beyond typical human decision-making, engineered by the phenomenon itself. Given what we understand of its capabilities, it's entirely plausible that the phenomenon employs an AI-like intelligence so advanced it operates at near omniscient levels, capable of anticipating human behavior, influencing institutional actions, and structuring secrecy precisely according to its objectives. With such sophisticated intelligence, the phenomenon wouldn't simply control where evidence ends up. It would actively manipulate the downstream propagation of secrecy, ensuring paranoia, compartmentalization, and bureaucratic inertia continually reinforce the cover-up. It would exploit human tendencies toward gatekeeping, fear of exposure, and institutional self-preservation, guaranteeing that even highly influential figures like Musk remain systematically excluded. The fact that Musk remains entirely unaware of any breakthroughs isn't an oversight, it's an engineered outcome. If someone of Musk's stature obtained credible evidence and chose to publicly disclose it, the entire secrecy structure could collapse overnight. That this scenario has never unfolded strongly suggests the phenomenon's control mechanism operates with extraordinary precision, going far beyond merely concealing evidence. It actively shapes and sustains the conditions necessary for indefinite secrecy. Why random UFO encounters would shatter the secrecy? What many people fail to understand is that UFOs do not operate according to typical scientific patterns. Typical science would unfold like this. A tribe in the Amazon reports sightings of an exotic animal, but they lack photographic evidence. Scientists become interested and decide to investigate. They travel to the region the tribe described, establish an observation site, and eventually capture definitive video evidence of the animal. They then continue returning to the habitat to learn more. UFOs, however, do not behave this way. They intentionally evade any smoking gun documentation that could enter the public domain, selectively allowing access only to those groups they wish. This explains why extensive efforts at Skinwalker Ranch by the National Institute of Discovery Science, NIDS, led by Robert Bigelow from 2005 to October 2009, failed to produce even a single piece of conclusive evidence. Meanwhile, entities like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, the intelligence community, and the military possess extensive smoking gun evidence, from recovered bodies to high-resolution 4K satellite imagery, which Chris Mellon has confirmed to filmmaker James Fox that he personally viewed. Yet, if someone with Elon Musk's influence and openness were shown the same footage Mellon saw, the entire system of secrecy could swiftly unravel. At the same time, universities, independent scientists, civilian researchers, and global scientific institutions remain completely shut out. This isn't coincidental, it's intentional. The phenomenon continues to sustain the ontological stalemate by design. I have no doubt this stalemate will eventually end, but when it does, the timing and circumstances won't be nearly as random as they may seem. The phenomenon's control mechanism is frighteningly effective. It is astonishing how many people in the UFO community say things like, I already know UFOs are real, so disclosure doesn't matter to me. Why push for disclosure? The government will just lie anyway. Or, We don't need official disclosure. Just go outside and experience it yourself. At first glance, these sentiments may not seem shocking, but dig a little deeper and you'll quickly realize just how bizarre they truly are. Let's tackle them one by one. I already know UFOs are real, so disclosure doesn't matter to me. Imagine suffering from a debilitating illness and personally discovering a medication that cures you. Instead of pushing for this medicine to be widely accessible, you shrug it off saying, I don't care if anyone else knows about this, it worked for me. This is the kind of madness underlying such a sentiment. And I don't think this is coincidental. These kinds of bizarre logical tropes are likely the result of how the control mechanism influences our thinking. More on this later. Why push for disclosure? The government will just lie anyway. This is misguided on multiple levels. First and foremost, we desperately need smoking gun evidence of the phenomenon to elevate this topic. Living perpetually within an ontological stalemate can only get us so far. And as we've all personally experienced, it ain't very far. Regarding the argument that any government-provided smoking gun evidence of non-human intelligence will inevitably come wrapped in lies, here's my response. Let them lie, but at least let's force them to admit the reality of non-human intelligence first. A smoking gun sets a new baseline. Even if governments continue their usual deception afterward, the paradigm will have already shifted. Without hard evidence, society can dismiss everything. With the smoking gun, the debate is over, and then the real fight begins over what's true and what's disinformation or misinformation. Herein lies the paradox, as I recently wrote on X. You can't effectively fight UFO disinformation without disclosure first. Not while the entire world is still debating whether the phenomenon even exists. Should we truly be preoccupied with potential lies and deception when we can't even globally agree that the phenomenon exists in the first place? We don't need official disclosure. Just go outside and experience it yourself. The just go outside argument is ridiculous. Saying just go out and look at the stars is like saying you don't need to study the ocean, just stare at the waves. Personal experiences, while valuable, cannot replace global integration of knowledge. The whole purpose of disclosure is to shift the burden of proof, ensuring we're no longer living in a world where only those who seek will find the truth. How the phenomenon plays Jedi mind tricks. What makes these tropes so bizarre is that they couldn't even exist without the phenomenon's carefully orchestrated control mechanism. Each of these sentiments only emerges because the phenomenon meticulously ensures that every piece of smoking gun evidence remains locked within militaries, intelligence agencies, and aerospace corporations, completely off limits to universities, independent scientists, civilian researchers, and global scientific institutions. Let the gravity of that sink in. It's almost as though the phenomenon has telepathically whispered to parts of the UFO community, you don't need smoking gun evidence. You shouldn't pursue definitive proof. Just go outside and look at the stars. And move along, be content while the ontological stalemate quietly persists. Why advanced technology alone can't explain the secrecy. At this point, an obvious rebuttal emerges. The military, intelligence agencies, and aerospace corporations have smoking gun evidence simply because their advanced technology allows them to obtain it. This argument, however, collapses under scrutiny. First, it overlooks the peculiar fact that every crash and landing consistently ends up exclusively in the hands of entities already committed to secrecy. Second, and perhaps more crucially, These groups developed their superior tracking and observational technology precisely because they already knew the phenomenon exists. Why do you think billions, potentially even trillions of dollars have been invested in researching this phenomenon behind closed doors? Because they know it is real. Imagine if the global scientific community also had definitive proof of the phenomenon's existence. How many resources do you think would immediately pour into unraveling this mystery? If intelligence agencies have indeed mastered tracking UAP, it's only because their existing knowledge motivated them to develop the capability. Scientific institutions would inevitably achieve the same advances if presented with irrefutable evidence. But that incentive can only come from undeniable smoking gun proof. We live in a fishbowl that the phenomenon created. There's an old saying, a fish doesn't know it's in water. Similarly, the UFO community often doesn't recognize the boundaries of the environment the phenomenon itself has created. We spend so much time analyzing sightings, examining evidence, listening to experiencers, or debating disclosure that we rarely reflect on the deeper structure or rules set by the phenomenon itself. Who actually holds definitive evidence? Who doesn't? And more importantly, why? If a fish tried to understand its bowl, it would first have to realize the bowl exists and that the water it's swimming in is not all there is. Likewise, we're left in a controlled environment interacting with evidence that appears and disappears at the phenomenon's discretion. This isn't simply an oversight, it's a profound implication about the nature of the phenomenon itself. If we're living inside an artificially constructed environment, we must ask, who or what constructed this environment? What is its purpose? What are the rules of engagement we don't even realize we're following? Until we grapple with these deeper implications, until we realize we're in water, we can't fully understand the phenomenon itself nor our own role within it. The trinity of distrust. Paradoxes of paradoxes. Disclosure is about letting go and healthy doubt. Perhaps even more than about gaining knowledge of our universe. Transformation trumps data. Collectively, we will learn 3 profound and unsettling truths, each of which will force us to empty our cups and begin anew. 1. We can't trust the government. 2. We can't trust the phenomenon. 3. We can't trust ourselves. True, we've always known we can't fully trust governments. Nevertheless, the revelation that numerous world governments, including many US allies, have deliberately concealed humanity's cosmic context for decades takes governmental distrust to an entirely unprecedented level. As tempting as it is to deify the phenomenon, let's be clear. We are all currently living inside a meticulously orchestrated artificial construct created by non-human intelligences. When people casually dismiss disclosure because, well, the government will lie anyway, they conveniently ignore the unsettling reality that any direct revelation from the phenomenon might be equally, or even more, deceptive. To assume otherwise is intellectually dishonest after decades of concealment. How can we possibly extend unquestioning trust to entities responsible for engineering the very disparity in smoking gun evidence that this paper outlines? In short, wake up. Finally, we must face the uncomfortable truth that we can't even trust ourselves. If our brightest minds and most respected institutions have consistently overlooked or outright denied the abundant evidence pointing toward a reasonable probability that non-human intelligence is engaging our world, how reliable can our judgments truly be about anything? And for those of us who were correct about UFOs, this realization remains equally crucial. Being right about one subject does not immunize us from blind spots elsewhere. One of disclosure's most profound lessons is that everyone has blind spots. Why disclosure is ultimately about love. Disclosure is ultimately about love because at its core, it's about becoming childlike again. As we come to understand that institutions can no longer define reality for us, we are much like children discovering that their parents don't have all the answers. We must begin to think for ourselves rather than outsourcing our discernment. When we realize that higher intelligences are far more advanced, yet not necessarily trustworthy or morally infallible, we learn that dogma is dangerous. If even civilizations vastly ahead of us remain fallible, abductions, anyone? How certain can we be that our ancestors got everything right? The most humbling realization of all is losing trust in ourselves. We must accept that even our smartest minds miss truths plainly visible in front of them. Each of us participates in this error in various ways. Nobody is immune. This forces us to approach understanding with curiosity rather than certainty. Becoming childlike. If you've studied near-death experiences, NDEs, you'll know that it's not uncommon for experiencers to be told to become more childlike upon returning to life. But why might that be? Children are naturally full of love because they live in a state of openness. They don't impose rigid categories or assume bad intent. They seek to understand. Disclosure, by stripping away false certainty, could return us to this mindset. Instead of seeing the world through dogmatic belief systems or questionable social conventions, we would be forced into genuine curiosity, deep listening, and greater empathy. The ultimate irony is that by discovering how profoundly wrong our assumptions about the universe have been, revealing a reality more bizarre than we could possibly imagine, we refine our ability to think at the highest level. We begin to balance intuition and intellect, skepticism and openness, without falling into blind belief or total denial. In this space, we finally learn to see things as they truly are. This is where love flourishes, not from certainty, but from the humility and wonder of a childlike heart. The wake-up bell, everyone.
But if it is otherworldly, we have to take into account our advancements in terms of our cell phone technology and why aren't these images being captured. We have to think about the nearly 4,000 satellites that are orbiting the Earth right now. Most of those satellites have cameras attached to them. Why hasn't any of that information been released?
I think what Representative Andre Carson of Illinois was getting at is, and I think he basically said it explicitly, if NHI, non-human intelligence, is engaging our world, then where's all the footage of it from cell phones? Where's all the footage from it from privately owned satellites that have cameras on them? And I hope my video has given you a hypothesis as to why the data that we would expect to filter into the public domain simply has not. Well, it comes down to a metaphor that I shared with you earlier about how the scientific pattern generally works. Biologists learn about a species that was witnessed by an Amazonian tribe. They find the testimony highly compelling, so they decide to go to the location, set up an observation station, and strive to get video footage of this alleged new species. Then, if they accomplish that, they keep coming back to the location to learn more and more about that new species in the Amazon. But UFOs don't operate that way. And I think it's obvious that the reason they don't operate this way is not coincidence, happenstance, or a statistical anomaly. It's because they're controlling who gets the smoking gun data and who doesn't. I can't tell you why. I can theorize, but I can't tell you why. And so, while I do believe it's true that I think it's likely that the intelligence community and aerospace and these private interests have learned how to track them, it's also true that the difficulty in tracking them is not necessary. When these craft engage our world, whether in the ocean or in the sky or in near-Earth orbit, they don't have to be so difficult to track. If they wanted to, they could ensure that they got tracked. They can ensure that people got video footage of them. They could easily create one situation where enough evidence was gathered in the public domain and the whole world would have to wake up to the reality that we're not alone. But they haven't done this. And yet, corporations like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, the intelligence community, militaries, and governments, in my opinion, do have reams and reams of smoking gun evidence in the form of footage, gun camera, satellite imagery, in the form of recovery of craft, materials, and bodies. The disparity, in my opinion, is not natural. It's actually artificial because it's engineered. And I don't want to go too into why I think the intelligences have orchestrated this, because that would be better for an entire video, and I've covered it before as well. But from the most optimistic perspective, they want to transform our civilization. And maybe there are only certain lessons, realizations, and an evolution that we can experience by creating and engineering this scenario. Because I do think that the non-human intelligences baited governments into the secrecy. They got exactly what they wanted. As soon as a craft crashed or landed, crashed, suddenly the phenomenon becomes a military secret. If these craft never landed, never crashed, I don't think governments would be so reluctant to talk openly about this. Just as one example, former Army Colonel Carl Nell has conveyed there is a Cold War sub rosa, and many other officials have conveyed this as well. This Cold War, in my opinion, is not a coincidence emerging from random scenarios. The phenomenon baited countries into this. And in fact, people like to get on the case of Tom DeLonge. Oh, Tom DeLonge is a fearmonger and he's intentionally putting the phenomenon in a bad light. And maybe he's not as charitable as he should be. That's debatable. But I totally see where he's coming from. And you should too if you want to maintain intellectual honesty and try to remove as much bias as you can. If it's true that craft have intentionally landed, as witnesses such as Dr. Eric Davis, Jake Barber and David Grush have said, and others as well throughout UFO history. And if these landings in places in all around the world are always getting into the hands of governments and therefore helping back engineering programs in places like China, Russia, and the United States, then I can totally understand why someone like Tom DeLonge thinks that maybe the phenomenon is up to no good. I think he might have said that the phenomenon is like playing a game and wants to see who's the strongest man standing among the nations, something like that. I'm not saying I agree with that. At the same time, I don't think Tom DeLonge is being disingenuous or irrational, because that's a hypothesis that should be on the table. Why are they doing this for 70 plus years? Why can't they just allow the whole world to come into the realization of their existence? Why have they intentionally given all of the smoking gun evidence to Lockheed, to Northrop, to the intelligence community, to governments, and so forth? That is a valid question, and it's a question the UFO community doesn't examine very much. And it's a very inconvenient question for those with a strong bias toward the idea that the phenomenon is our friends and only wants the best for us. Now, I'm not comfortable saying what the phenomenon is doing. I don't know. But I said recently that the phenomenon doesn't want us to trust it. And I think that's kind of obvious, at least from my perspective. Because if it really wanted us to trust it, it would operate very, very differently. I mean, doesn't that go without saying? Do I even need to elaborate on that? You fill in the blanks, please. But if you require me to fill in the blanks for you, the phenomenon engages our world just enough to make it obvious it's here, but not enough to involve the whole world in a way where we can't pick our own adventure. Because isn't that what's going on? The scientific institutions generally pick their own adventure of, there's no smoking gun evidence. Sorry. If non-human intelligence were here, we would know. Who's responsible for that attitude? You're just going to say the scientists are all a bunch of meanies? You have to try to be objective here. Yes, I would agree. I don't think the scientists are being optimally objective, but at the same time, they're put into a really messed up situation because the phenomenon is operating in a way that engineers the ontological stalemate that we're in. And therefore, from a scientific standpoint, they're not exactly wrong by being skeptical because there's no smoking gun evidence. You have to see how this situation is engineered. In my opinion, I don't think it's likely that this is a statistical anomaly over 70 plus years. I think it's far more likely that the phenomenon is engineering this. Okay? And this is a conversation we're going to have in a post-disclosure world. What is going on? And that's why we need disclosure. And that's why we need smoking gun evidence. Because without smoking gun evidence, people can just say none of it is true. In what universe is that healthy if it's not true? In what universe is it healthy for people to be able to pick their own adventure when there's non-human intelligence in our ocean? People are getting abducted. There are school landings in broad daylight. There are UAP in near Earth orbit, and there are corporations that are doing dances with the phenomenon, recovering the craft, studying it. And that's, and if Jake Barber is watching this or anyone from Skywatcher is watching this, that is the That's the challenge, isn't it? Are they going to cooperate with you now that you're outside of the legacy program? Because obviously, Skywatcher, obviously, they have engineered this whole situation. And they don't need to appear to you. They don't need to wait for your psionic assets to meditate and to summon them. The non-human intelligences could show up over the Macy Day Parade if they wanted to. They could show up over any populated area very easily. They have agency. So let's try to open up our eyes, because I am not buying it. It's not that I don't think the psionic assets can do things that interact with the phenomenon. But at the same time, it's quite obvious that the phenomenon has agency, and we can extrapolate from UFO history that, in my opinion, almost certainly has to be the case. We see the agency in the engineered environment they've created. They didn't have to create that environment. They chose to create that environment. And they could go against that engineered reality at any moment through a mass sighting in broad daylight, where no longer can the world at large, 8 billion of us, deny their reality. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to be publishing what you just listened to in paper form as well, because I think it's very powerful as an article. And we'll be talking more about this, and I will be doing more videos and more articles building on this theme, if you will. And part of why I put so much effort into doing this is because I'm trying to break through the bias and biases that I think are entrenched unjustifiably within the UFO community. And as we passage into a post-disclosure world, we're going to have to learn to respect each other's hypotheses, because the phenomenon, in my opinion, has engaged itself in a way where many hypotheses are on the table. They have not decided to give us clarity. And hopefully that will help us to be more open-minded and more childlike, as I spoke about. Please do not forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my YouTube memberships. You can become a Patreon. You can give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below, or you can slap a like on this bad boy, and I will appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Booyah. Special thanks to all YouTube members, patrons, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.